And we are live. So, welcome to episode 250 for the Old American Werewolf. That's me. Thank you for joining us today, this early morning show. It's kind of a special time, an unusual time, but we have a special guest today. And so we have Father Calvin Robinson from the Common Sense Crusade. You've probably seen him often on Podcast with the Lotus Eaters, and you'll see him on Pints with Aquinas, and just about everywhere that you'll see some sort of conservative center-right, channel. You'll see Father Calvin there, and he's been there for a while. This is not a new thing for him. Welcome to the show. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time.
Not at all. It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Indeed. I guess we'd start out a little bit with some, I guess we have about 45 minutes, so we'll start out with a little bit of background. We know that you transitioned over from the UK to the US quite recently, but where did you originally, were you in the UK? Were you somewhere else? Were you always a part of the faith? So on and so forth.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a town called Mansfield in Nottinghamshire, which is the closest place you'll know to there is Sherwood Forest, which is Robin Hood country.
Okay.
So that's where I grew up. I moved to London in my teens, and I've been there for a long, long time. And I went to Oxford for a couple of years, but from Oxford I went back to London, and I've just pretty much been in London throughout my work life and then into my vocational life. When I received the calling to Holy Orders, I worked in a church in London, and then I've just been called out to a church in Grand Rapids in West Michigan.
So what is for you the call to vocation? What does that look like? Is it an interior monologue? Is it a voice that you hear? Is it just sort of events that shape the direction that you were moving in, and you're like, okay, this is my destination, or this is the starting point for what I want to do? How does that work for you individually?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked that one before, at least not in that way. So it's almost like a pulling or a nudging. It's like you're being dragged in a certain direction. And I think we all are to some degree. God has a plan for all of us, right? We all have a vocation, and it's about aligning with his plan, really. It's about looking for the door that he opens. And so when we feel that nudge, quite often we run away from it. Quite often we avoid it as best we possibly can. Sometimes we come back around and eventually submit. Other times we don't. And so, for me, I was working in industry, and it was a very superficial experience, very superficial life. And I could feel this pull into a different direction, into something more fulfilling and more vocational. And I started teaching, and teaching was very much the start of my vocation and a part of it, but not the whole of it. And I kept feeling that nudge into Holy Orders. And the way I thought about it at the time was that what I'm doing as a teacher, as an assistant principal, as an educational consultant, is helping educate the next generation, right? Giving them the skills and the knowledge and the understanding that they need, but not necessarily giving them the character. And I worked in a lot of Christian schools, and I realized that actually what we're doing was we're sending kids away with good academic grades, but not necessarily catechizing them. And I realized that every day should be centered around the Mass. And I realized that everything should be centered around Christ. And as an educationalist, I wanted to find a way to do that. And at the same time, I felt this pull towards Holy Orders. And I figured maybe God's saying that I need to set up a Christian school. That isn't where I've been led. But, these things, when he nudges you in certain directions, it's often not where we'd expect it to be.
So for you, it was a relatively obstacle-free journey, just kind of one foot in front of the other, and you just trusted in faith that you were headed in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Is that okay? Okay. Well, I imagine that's the easiest way to go. That's probably, as opposed to, like you said, the person who pulls away, loses a lot of time and then eventually comes back, or the person who, just sort of ignores that voice that they might hear. Did you find, working in education, that was an increasingly difficult thing to do in terms of the spiritual component as the West became increasingly, especially within the past 25 years, increasingly secular? As people seem to sort of cast off, we have human rights now. We don't need, Christianity anymore here in the US, maybe you there in the UK and across Europe. We have these governmental components that will sort of act as our spine. Maybe, at least from my perspective, not realizing that they were sort of extracting the spiritual backbone of their own, of the larger society. And those foundational things that cause things just to, if you pull the foundation of a house apart, the house is going to collapse. Yeah. Inadvertently, perhaps, at least at the street level. What was your experience as you attempted to add these components into your work life, into your professional life, into what was this sort of evolution for you spiritually? Did you get pushback on that, or were you able to navigate correctly, or luckily, or providentially, and say, okay, I just keep landing, my foot just keeps landing in the right space every time?
Yeah, no, in education, you're right to say, with anything, you're right to say that remove the foundation, the house will eventually crumble. And this is what's happened with a lot of areas of public life. Christ has been removed. And of course, Christ is the foundation. He is the cornerstone. And so eventually the house crumbles, even if it's just piece by piece, but people don't always see it at the time. Yeah. And in education, I saw this especially where even in the Christian schools that I worked in England, the faith was always like a byproduct, not even a byproduct, it was like a sideline, right? It was kind of the RE teacher, the religious education teacher will look after the religious stuff, and we'll just get on with the academic stuff, the more important stuff. It is always seen as a bit extra, a bit of an add-on. And schools, especially Christian schools, have values. Oh, they say that they have values, and what that usually means is it's like a motto, right? It's like 3 words underneath their school name. It might be, sense something school, faith, hope, love. But what do those things mean? Like, how do you embed those in the environment of the school? Quite often they're just buzzwords now. This marketing, this branding, PR front, and so it's all messed up, because what should happen is that you should be able to walk into any single classroom, speak to anybody, whether they're a pupil or teacher, and say, where is Jesus Christ in this? And they should be able to tell you exactly. And that's the kind of level of catechism we should be expecting in Christian schools. But unfortunately, Christian schools have become secularized, especially the state schools, the Church of England schools, because in the state we see that diversity, inclusion, and equality are actually the values that we adhere to more than anything else. And so even in the Christian schools, they don't want to be seen as offending anyone, especially, the Mohammedans or anyone of any other faith. So we can't be too Christian. Let's not be too in their face with the truth. Like, let's hide the truth in order to save people's feelings. It's absolutely ridiculous. The whole job of any Christian should be to lead other Christians to Christ, right? To disciple the nations, to go forth and multiply. All the commandments we're given as Christians are to love thy neighbor, to lead people to Christ so that they can live forever. It's quite a simple commandment. But unfortunately, we forget in this suicidal empathy, in this false compassion. And what we end up doing is leading souls toward damnation because we're so shy and embarrassed about the truth.
It seems like the frog that is slowly being boiled, and now that the water is, fully bubbling. If it got any harder, my apologies. I'm seeming to be having some video problems. Now we're at the point where we're at a bit of a crescendo, whether you consider it a political crescendo. I consider it to be very much a spiritual crescendo. I think at the highest level, what we are seeing is a spiritual battle that is taking place. When did you start to notice that things, because it's one thing to say, okay, well, the society is becoming increasingly secular. But then it's another thing to say, well, we're openly under attack. which is what many people feel, what I happen to agree with. And we're under attack from outside forces, from whether it be mass immigration or our own identity crisis as to who we are as a society, so on and so forth, whether we identify as Christians or just Westerners, so on and so forth. When did you see things really start to move into the red? Because I have a specific instance that happened, but I want to hear about what your experience was and how far back that goes.
Yeah, I don't think there are two different things, secularization and being under attack. They are one of the same. We've called the West Christendom for a long, long time, and these days we call it Western society or Western civilization, but it has been called Christendom for the longest time. And that moving away from Christendom is a moving away from Christ, and the secularization of our society is the removing of Christ. Once again, it's this what you referred to at the start of the show as removing the foundation, and eventually their house will crumble. But that is all an attack. It's all a spiritual attack. The father of lies has always been attacking Christ's body, his church. And we see that in many, many different ways. The secularization is one of them. The infiltration is another. But in every aspect of our lives, we have to have our guard up, and we have to wear the full armor of God. And what we're seeing is that the rampant attacks of the enemy are increasing. They're becoming more overt, more obvious, and the devil is overplaying his hand. So that Satan is cocky, but of course pride is one of his ultimate sins. So of course he is.
I remember specifically about 2016, I was living overseas in India, and we had just gotten this new batch of teachers. I was a teacher. I worked for students with learning disabilities, learning difficulties. I was head of department there, and we got this new influx of young American teachers, 20-somethings. They, on the surface, appeared to be very pleasant and, nice people, these young girls. But then I would start to hear these terms I had never heard of before because I had been gone for 6 years by then. And I'd start to hear terms like the patriarchy. And you start to hear the terminology. And then the seemingly pleasant young ladies would, on the flip of a coin, just turn into the most venomous people. And, they hated their own society and their culture, and we hate America. And I'm like, where is all of this coming from? You're only here because you have that blue passport to live this, this really fantastic opportunity. Lots of people from lots of other countries would love to have this opportunity, but they don't, because guess what? They're not Americans. And so, those types of academic institutions are looking from people, especially if you're looking at English components, they're looking for native speakers. That only comes from usually one of two places, your home country or mine. But just this anger and this bubbling up. And I think you're right in that, the cards start to be played a little too soon. And while it definitely had some success in gaining ground, I think people at the same time were figuring out how to push back on this, which has led us to where we are today. And you've arrived in the U.S. at quite a time. How are you finding it? Because you come to the U.S. as Father Calvin Robinson from the Common Sense Crusade, having a name for yourself and, what you stand for. I take it were you immediately well received in this political time and what we're facing? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of points to what you just said. The attack on the patriarchy I want to point out in particular is because this once again is the enemy, the father of lies, attack on the father of truth. This is a satanic attack on Christ and all things good, because the patriarchy is God's good order, his natural order. God revealed himself to us through the patriarchs. God himself told us to call him Father. He is the archetype of patriarchy. And so when people say we want to smash the patriarchy, what they're inadvertently saying is they want to attack God. This is the enemy's attack of God the Father. And we see this throughout society. Fatherhood is under attack. We see rampant crime rates across the West as households are breaking down and fathers are no longer in the household. This attack on men in particular, they call masculinity toxic. And as a direct result of that, we see men being effeminate and infantilized, and we see women becoming more masculine and taking on men's roles. And all of this is this is a inversion of God's good order. It's a perversion, actually, because what we've seen through the feminist movement, which started the lines of attacking the patriarchy, but it's a line that all Marxists now use. What we've seen through this is that they were arguing that for women to become equal, women had to become like men, work in men's spaces, take on men's roles, forgetting that men and women are different. They're not interchangeable, and that's a good thing, because that's how God designed us. We're complementary in that way. We complement each other. But the feminist movement has said women need to become like men to become equal. And of course, everyone's like, well, of course we want equality. Let's fight for that. And what's actually happened is, in making women like men, we've also made men like women, and that's gone so far into the feminist movement has pushed into what is now transgenderism, this idea that men can become women. And so the fight first started for women to take over men's spaces, or to become involved in men's spaces, rather than say, actually, it's okay for men to have spaces and women to have spaces. Men's clubs, gentlemen's clubs, that kind of thing is good and fine and proper. But now we've pushed so far past that boundary bit that now we have men taking over women's spaces. We have men in women's changing rooms. We have boys in girls' changing rooms. We have men boxing, fighting, physically harming women in the name of equality. It's wrong, it's wicked, it's evil, and this is the inversion of God's good order. And this all comes from this one tagline of smash the patriarchy.
The connection between the patriarchs and the patriarchy and that sort of Luciferian attack, it's not something I'd ever directly connected, but that makes so much sense when you say it. And, I have no problem with people having equality of opportunity. You understand, as an educator, everybody has access to the same information. Every student in that class has access to the same information, the same opportunity, maybe after school. Hey, I've got some extra time. If people want to come in and review, I'm happy to do that with them. I'm happy to help you organize and plan out some sort of study schedule. That is not just for one person here. It's for everybody in the room. But this whole thing sort of shifted over into equality of outcome. And, I would have lost my job if I guaranteed that everyone was going to get a B+ or an A or a 7 or, whatever the grading system was. And it's transformed into this thing that's just unrecognizable. And it's a real horror show to watch.
Well, this is because equality is a utopian, or you could say dystopian belief. It's not actually a Christian belief. There is no equality. God never promises equality. Hierarchy is part of his design. Even the angels have a hierarchy. The heavenly kingdom has a hierarchy. He tells us that we will reap our rewards in heaven based on what we put in. So we have a hierarchy. We don't all receive the same from him. The graces that he shares are equal in terms of they're accessible to all. So we have that equal opportunity, but we don't have equal outcomes from God our Father. And so this idea of equality is a demonic idea.
So, bearing all this in mind, how did that impact your existence within the UK? As you start to make appearances, as you start to speak out, as the voices of other prominent people like Douglas Murray or Tommy Robinson, or people, from the Lotus Eaters, so on and so forth. What was the impact on pushback?
Well, the state is corrupt at this point. Excuse me. It is entirely liberal and secular, unfortunately. And so it doesn't like dissent. And the state has never liked dissent. We had dissenters laws in the United Kingdom for the longest time. But they only in the last 100 years or so were they repealed. But, or just over that. But the state doesn't like dissent. So it tries to quash dissent. And we've seen that in a lot of ways recently. Tommy Robinson, good friend of mine, good man, good fighter for the country. He's a patriot, a lapsed Catholic. He has been arrested in the past few days for releasing a documentary. So we don't have free speech in our country, unfortunately. He released a documentary exposing the truth and has been arrested and sent to prison for it. I've got a friend who has been arrested for silently praying in her own head. So we don't even have freedom of thought, never mind freedom of speech. In Scotland, they're talking about expanding that law so that if you are caught, if you can be overheard or seen praying in your own home, and someone takes offense, that is a problem too, a criminal offense too. And so our faith is being persecuted, and the truth is being oppressed. And we've seen this throughout the last few years. You saw this over COVID. Big tech were working in cahoots with the government. If you purported something that was against the approved narrative of the time, you were suppressed, whether that was removed from the platform or the police knocking on your door. Even though years later we found out the things that people were tweeting at the time or posting on Facebook at the time were indeed true. We just
I remember.
So dissent is being oppressed and quashed at a rapidly increasing rate, and so people are having to be stronger and bolder and more courageous with the truth. But that's part of the Christian life, in that we are called to be in the world but not of the world, and we will be persecuted, we will be hated as he was hated first, but we will be blessed because of that persecution. So we always have to keep that in mind. We're not supposed to fit in with the culture. In fact, if we do fit in with the culture, we know we are bad Christians, because the culture is corrupt. The culture is not ordered in God's good design. The culture doesn't have a Christian moral compass. The culture is abstract, secular, atheist, amoral, and that's not the Christian way. So if we fit in, if the culture does not offend us, we are bad Christians.
I use the Hallow app every day, and I'm doing the Bible in a Year with Father Mike.
Oh, yeah.
And you're just say again.
I love his enthusiasm.
Yeah, every day. But I mean, you're just, if you really start to pay attention, because it's easy to read, but then on your own, but it's helpful to have some sort of interpretation with you every day. You could review things after Mass or ask to speak to the Father. I'm very lucky. I live in an area where I have a weekly TLM, so I'm able to make that. But to be able to use these other tools, I was surprised, maybe even shocked, to realize how early in the world you see such brokenness, and so many things that just, for me, these stories just sort of repeat again and again and again. And when you said, you mentioned, institutions under attack, it just seems like, the world has been under attack since its creation. I mean, even a snake gets into the Garden of Eden. One of Christ's own 12 is his betrayer. These stories just keep playing out. And so once you start to understand these things, they're less surprising to you. You're like, yeah, I've seen this before. This has been happening for a very long time. I don't know how much ground, is being lost or gained. Now that you are in the US, what are you seeing in terms of the political climate? Is it better than the UK? Is it worse? Is it the same? What are you seeing from the people? Because I imagine, in the UK, you had a lot of contact with, just everyday people, seeing you on the street or, contacting you in social media, relating these stories. What is the situation from, a new visitor here or a new resident? What are you seeing?
Right, it's a good question. So what I'm seeing in the US is that people still have optimism. There's a lot of optimism, particularly around the election. There's a lot of hope that things can change. But there is a bit of pessimism. But I like to remind people that all things are relative, because people keep saying things like, we've gone too far, things are going too woke and too liberal, this, that, and the other. And I remind them, look at what's happening in the United Kingdom. Look at what's happening in Europe. Things are dire out there. Relatively speaking, things are very good out here. And so I think that's an important reminder, but also a warning as well to not do what we did. Don't go down the path that we went down. You still have time to turn things around here and fight. I'm not convinced that Western Europe does, actually. My homeland, the United Kingdom, I can't see any democratic means of turning things around, unfortunately. We don't have any conservatives. We don't have any Christians in government. We don't have any major conservative or Christian parties, other than we've got the United Kingdom Independence Party, we've got UKIP, but we don't have any representatives of UKIP in government. There are a handful of reform representatives in government. Yeah. They are slightly to the right of centre, but not very strongly, and certainly not very Christian. So there's very, very little hope of turning things around in the United Kingdom. Also, there doesn't seem to be much fight there. Americans still have that fighting spirit. I think those first two amendments installed that in you. The First Amendment means you've got that protection. The Second Amendment means you've got the protection against that protection, for that protection, and that's a very good thing. We had our guns removed from us in '97, and things haven't been right since.
Yeah, it feels like a lot hinges on what's going to happen next week.
Yeah,
I think everybody can feel it, one way or the other, whether you're in one camp or the other. But yeah, a lot of things hinge on that. I think a lot of the backbone that comes with being an American comes from those first two amendments. I agree with you absolutely. I think there is an optimism. I mean, I'm talking to my friends. They seem to have a good feeling about, what's the way this seems to be going. But as far as I'm concerned, it ain't over till it's over. Because, I expect there's any number of cards at the bottom of this deck that are probably still to be played, and so on and so forth. And so, just have to pray about it, I guess, and hope that it goes the way that we hope it does. It goes the way that we hope it does. For whatever reason, this is the world that we're living in right now. And it's all up to God. So we have to have trust that whatever it is, it's according to His plan. So. We
get the leaders that we deserve, don't we? And at the moment, we're at a crossroads. It could go either way. I hope and pray that it will go the way of Donald Trump. I think the president would be a good thing for America. I think that one of the reasons he was saved from that assassination is to avoid a civil war in this country. And one of the other reasons he was potentially saved is because America still has a fighting chance of turning things around back towards Christ. Now, Kamala and her government would be very anti-Christ. They are a death cult. They support nationwide abortion. Tim Walz is very much against free speech. They'd be anti-constitutional and anti-Christ. It would be very bad for America and very bad for the rest of the world. Now, Trump isn't a perfect human being, but none of us are. We're all sinners. But I know that he has good Christians around him. And so I'm hoping that if he gets back in after being saved by God, he could center his primacy on God rather than on himself or any of his own personal ideas. And so that would create a good Christian nation.
You'd have to believe that 2 assassination attempts and, in a few weeks would give anyone serious pause. And you're right, he's not a perfect person, but he seems to be the person for this time.
Yes.
And like many stories that keep playing out, the most unlikely person you would probably think to insert if you had this conversation 20 years ago. You'd be like, huh? No, that it's always the most unlikely people. So that gives me hope right there. I guess, everybody, if you're listening in the stream or in the replay, just go out and vote. And
this is the power, Michael, because Christians in this country, in the United States, don't seem to vote, but in the majority, which is a shocking thing to me, because if every Christian in this country voted, the election would go their way every single time. Like the power and influence that Christians have, there's been this massive dissuasion by the enemy. The father of lies continues to twist and manipulate the truth. And he keeps saying things like separate church and politics. Christians don't need to be involved in politics. You just focus on you just go to church. You just read the Bible. That's not enough. It's not enough. We are in the world, even though we're not of the world. We have to be active, and we have to remind ourselves that God works through us.
I think that what happens here in this country, there are a number of, sort of lapsed or lukewarm Christians. And then you get people that seem to be so devout that their feet really aren't on the concrete. They don't live in any sort of practical world. So if it's not, if they don't have a literalist candidate, they can't seem to be able to compromise with that. And so, it's funny. I took a trip, I guess, my first trip to Israel about 5 years ago. And I went on my own to Jerusalem and said that I was going to go into the old city and find all the stations. And I couldn't, of course, because, you just get turned around in there. And I was approached by this man who offered to guide me through. And he asked, as people always ask, because he was Palestinian, he's like, "Are you a Christian?" I was like, "Yeah, Christian." He goes, "Do you go to church?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "That's weird." He goes, "Because I meet so many Christians." He was a very nice man. This guy named Victor. I'll never forget him. Just interesting people you meet for like an hour, one of those situations. And he said, "I meet so many Christians from so many different parts of the world that say they never go to church."
Mm.
And I didn't know what to say to that. I mean, there seemed to be no reason that he would, pick it up, but that explains a lot, going back to what we were saying from 25 years ago, casting your faith aside for substantive government. The government's going to be our master now, so on and so forth. We're going to have human rights. The Cold War is over. There are no more enemies. There are no more enemies. Two world wars are over. Vietnam's over. The Soviet Union has collapsed. There's no one left to fight. And wow, did they get that one wrong? Let me turn this from something bleak into something a little more fun. What is it like when you're not meeting the president of the United States? When you're not at these, large events, or when you're not doing what you do, trying to make a difference. What do you do for fun? I mean, you take off the collar, you kick off your shoes, you kick back. Do you have time for that? What is it? Is it video games? Is it playing cards? Is it is it reading books? Is it movies? Are you an MCU fan or something like that?
Oh, no. This is one of my sins, Michael, in that I very rarely have downtime, and the Lord told us to rest on the seventh day because He rested on the seventh day. So we should have downtime, and it's something I'm constantly working on in my life, trying to install new habits and new hobbies. I love shooting. I've only been shooting once since I've been here. I've only been here a month, but I want to make that a regular habit once I get...
that should be easy enough to fix around here.
Right. Once I'm allowed to get my own guns legally, then I'll get my own guns and I'll go shooting as a hobby. But I read a lot. That's pretty much my only hobby at the moment. I'd love to have more hobbies. And winter's coming in Michigan. Perhaps I'll take up some winter sports or something, or go and support local sports teams. But it's definitely something that's on my mind. It has been on my mind for a while. I used to play video games a long time ago. I probably sunk too much time into video games, to be honest with you. So I've gone from one extreme to the other. I'm working on it.
Are you reading anything good right now, or is it entertainment reading, or is it more to educate yourself? Or
so I'm reading that Hidden Strength, which is the third book in the Ransom series, C.S. Lewis's science fiction series. It's my least favorite actually at the moment. I loved Paralendra. I loved that Hidden Strength. No, what's the other one? Forbidden Planets. Sorry, book 1 and 2 I really loved. But book 3 I'm not really enjoying. I'm over halfway through. It's just starting to get good. So like the first half was quite dry. I think he introduced way too many characters. In the first 2 books, there were only like a handful of characters. In the third book, there are so many people and so many different places. So it's just a different writing style. But I love C.S. Lewis's works. I think he is one of the best modern theologians. He's just such an amazing Christian man. And his Mere Christianity is one of the first books I recommend to anybody actually searching an encounter with Christ.
I entered the church several years ago. My RCIA sponsor, one of the first things he did was give me a copy of that book. So yeah, it really is fantastic. Lewis is fantastic, just a fantastic writer. They don't make them like that anymore.
No,
they really don't. Whether it be him or Tolkien. Those sorts of expanse, people that just create entire universes. The writing is just so elegant. You feel the touch. It's almost like an otherworldly touch in there. When you read those sorts of things, like almost like he's channeling that sort of thing. And you don't get that nowadays in today's pulpy sort of fiction, the sci-fi, or it's so nihilistic.
the first book that I got for my niece was the Chronicles of Narnia. I've always loved his works. It's fantastical in a good way. I've not actually been hooked by Tolkien in the same way. I know a lot of Catholics are. I'm willing to give him another chance. When I was younger, I found them long-winded. But now that I'm grown up, maybe I'll give them another shot, give them another read, and find out if they speak to me on a different level.
Yeah, sometimes you come back to something and it's, you're just in a different place. So I would recommend it at least once, just to say that you did. I own them all. I read them once. I haven't looked at them since. But, you never forget them. You never forget them. Okay. I'll tell you, is there anything, because I don't want to, drag this out just for the sake of time. Is there any point that you would have liked to have addressed that we have not gotten into today?
No, but I am curious where the werewolf comes from.
Well, like I was saying before we went on, I was, Universal fan and then the Hammer fan. And this started out as a channel just talking about horror movies. And I got some old friends of mine together from college. I mean, I'm 55 now. And people that, we just don't have an opportunity to see each other. You kind of grow apart. And even if you're in the same state, you're at different jobs and different locations. And this was something that we could do and just get around and shoot the what about an old movie. I think we started talking about like Karloff's The Mummy. And then the second one was Lugosi's Dracula. And then, we just started going from there. For me, I'm really bad with titles. And the werewolf is my favorite movie monster. I think that vampires get all the smoke, probably because of, Stoker's book. So, you've got that one guy there. But the werewolf is always my favorite movie monster. So that's just, kind of what it turned into. We do different themes, whether it be for different seasons, Halloween, like we're doing like ghost stories right now, that sort of thing. But the channel's also branched off into interviews. And so I'm just trying to meet interesting people. I like talking to people, and having I'm terrible at small talk. But if, I'll just walk up to anybody and just start talking about anything. And that works for me. So I had another guy on here. He runs another channel that's military. This guy, Dave Park, and he was former Army Ranger and like a military contractor for some organization. Had him on there. I've had a few film directors on. Now, I've had Father Calvin Robinson on. It doesn't have to necessarily be any one particular stream or theme. It's talking to people because, like I say all the time, when I do this kind of stuff, this is what the internet is supposed to be.
Cool. I like it. Well, keep at it and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. And same to you, Father. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Father Calvin Robinson, everybody. I have the links to all of his social media, Common Sense Crusade, Fox and Father, so on and so forth, down in the description. So please check out this content. It's probably some of the most important. There are a lot of people out here talking about this kind of stuff, but Father Robinson, Father Calvin is right up there with the best of them, addressing these issues, the downward spiral of our society that may be down, but can certainly rise again. That's the way that I look at it. So give him a look and hear what he has to say, because it's worthwhile. All right. That's it for me. My thanks once again to Father Calvin. We will see you all in the next video. Okay. Take care, everyone. God bless you and have a good one. All right. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody. This is the American Werewolf. Thanks for stopping by. Like the video. Leave